Friends of Islam, this time the Islamic faith is back before you to share Islamic information. I hope it inspires your activities today, and don't forget to click the subscribe button and activate the bell button notifications so you don't miss the latest news from the Islamic Faith channel. In a corner of Shanghai, there lives a woman named Jingmi, a 27-year-old girl who works as a graphic designer at a technology company. Since she was little, she grew up in a family that held firmly to the teachings of Confucianism and Taoism. However, deep in her heart, there were always questions that she could not find the answer to. What is the real purpose of life? Why are humans in this world? One day she got a design project from a Muslim client from Malaysia named Ramat. Ramat is a businessman who has a company in Shanghai. While working together, Jingmi often saw him praying on time and reading the Quran. She was curious and asked, "Why do you always make time to pray?" Ramat smiled and answered, "Because this life is not only about the world, but also about the afterlife. Praying is my way of being grateful to the Creator." That answer kept ringing in Jingmi's mind. She started to find out more about Islam, read articles, and watched videos about Islamic teachings on the internet. However, she was still hesitant because her environment was very unfamiliar with these teachings. Every night after coming home from work, Jingmi took the time to read articles about Islam or watch videos of lectures from scholars on YouTube. The more she learned, the greater her curiosity. However, on the other hand, she also felt afraid. Islam was something foreign in her life. Her family was a devout Confucian, and religion was rarely discussed in her neighborhood, let alone Islam, which was often misunderstood in her country. What if I really got interested in Islam? What would happen to my family? How will my friends respond? She thought to herself. The doubts continued to haunt her, making her waver between her desire to seek the truth and her fear of the consequences. One day after work, Jingmi dared to visit a mosque in downtown Shanghai. She chose a quiet time so as not to attract attention. From the outside, the mosque looked beautiful and serene. Her heart pounded as she stepped into the mosque's courtyard. There, she met a Muslim woman wearing a hijab who greeted her with a friendly smile. "Do you need help?" the woman asked gently. Jingmi hesitated for a moment before finally nodding. "I want to know more about Islam." The woman introduced herself as Amina, a Chinese convert who had converted to Islam several years ago. They sat in the mosque's garden, and Jingmi began to express all her questions and doubts. Amina listened patiently, then said, "I used to feel the same way as you, afraid, doubtful, and worried about my family's reaction. But you know what? If your heart feels that Islam is the truth, then don't let fear stop you." Those words felt soothing to Jingmi's heart. She became more enthusiastic to learn more deeply. Day by day, Jingmi visited the mosque more often and discussed with Amina and the mosque's imam. She began to learn about the concept of Tawheed, prayer, and the true meaning of Islam. One night, after reading the translation of the Quran, she found a verse that touched her heart. "Whoever Allah wills to guide, He will surely open his chest to accept Islam." QS Al-An'am 125. Jingmi closed the book with teary eyes. She felt that this was the answer she had been looking for. Without hesitation, the next day, she went to the mosque and with a firm heart said the two sentences of the Shahada. "I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah." Tears of emotion flowed down her cheeks. Jingmi was now a Muslimah. Since that day, Jingmi's life changed. She felt calmer and more peaceful. However, the real challenge had just begun. The first day she came home wearing a hijab, her mother immediately looked at her in confusion. "What are you wearing, Jingmi?" her mother asked in a worried tone. Her father, who was reading the newspaper, turned his head and frowned. "You started dressing like a foreigner. Did you convert to Islam?" he asked in a deep voice. Jingmi took a deep breath. She knew this would happen. Softly, she answered, "Yes, father, mother. I have been searching for the truth for a long time, and I found it in Islam." For a moment, the room was silent. Then suddenly, her father slammed the newspaper and stood up. "Do you realize what you are doing? You are destroying our family tradition," he snapped. Her mother began to cry, while her older brother Jingwei looked at her in disappointment. "Do you really want to leave everything our family has taught you?" Jingwei asked in a soft voice. Jingmi held his hand tightly. I am not leaving my family. I have only found something that makes me feel at peace. But her father would not listen. He threw Jingmi out of the house. With tears flowing, Jingmi left, taking only a few clothes and a Quran that Amina had given her. That night she cried in her apartment. But in her sadness, she prostrated herself, asking Allah for strength. Oh Allah, I know this path is not easy, but if this is the right path, then strengthen my heart. Day after day passed, and Jingmi continued to live her life as a Muslima. She continued to work, but secretly she also studied Islam more deeply. One day her mother called her. Jingmi, are you okay? Jingmi smiled when she heard her mother's voice. I'm fine, Mom. I always pray for you. From that short conversation, she felt that her mother was starting to soften, so she often visited the house, even though her father still didn't want to talk to her. Every time she came, she showed her affection. She still helped her mother cook, brought small gifts, and spoke softly to her father even though he never responded. Over time, her family began to see changes in her. Jingwei, who was initially angry, began to be interested in asking about Islam. How do you feel after converting to Islam? Jingwei asked one night. Jingmi smiled. I feel at peace, and I know the purpose of my life now. That conversation became the beginning of a big change. Jingwei started reading about Islam. Then her mother also started asking questions, until one night her mother called her with a trembling voice. Jingmi, teach me how to pray in Islam. Jingmi cried when she heard that. Her prayers began to be answered. A few months later, her mother recited the Shahada. Her father was the most difficult person to accept. However, after seeing his wife and child change into better people, he began to open his mind. One day his father secretly watched Jingmi pray. When he finished, he asked, What do you feel when you pray? Jingmi answered softly, I feel like I'm talking directly to God, Dad. From then on, her father began to read books about Islam, until one night he called Jingmi and said, Teach me about Islam. Tears of joy flowed again. Now her entire family has received guidance. They now live in the light of Islam, supporting each other in their faith. Jingmi, who was once afraid of losing his family, instead managed to lead them to the light of truth. And this journey for them is just the beginning. Her mother, though still weak due to her health, always supported her. She often said, Do not just seek guidance for yourself, but also share it with others. Those words became Jingmi's life guide. She was determined to continue preaching in her own way, through morals, knowledge, and compassion. After her father converted to Islam, Jingmi felt her life became more complete. However, she knew that this journey would not stop here. She became active in the Muslim community in China, helping other converts who faced challenges like her own. She spoke at Islamic forums, sharing her story, and encouraging those who were still hesitant to embrace Islam. Years passed, and Jingmi is now a well-known figure in the Muslim community in China. She is not only a strong Muslim woman, but also an inspiration to many. One day, a young girl came to her and said, I used to be skeptical about Islam, but after reading your story, I want to learn more. Jingmi smiled. She recalled her own journey, from a doubtful girl to someone who brought light to others. Guidance is not something that can be forced, but it can touch the hearts of anyone who sincerely seeks it. After her entire family converted to Islam, Jingmi and her family's lives changed drastically. They felt a peace they had never felt before. However, guidance was not the end of the journey, it was the beginning of a new test. The people around them began to notice their changes. Neighbors who had been close to her began to distance themselves. Some of her mother's old friends even refused to speak to her. One day, a distant relative came to the house and said sarcastically, Lao Mei, how could you abandon our ancestors' teachings? You have tarnished the family name. Her mother simply smiled and replied, I did not abandon my ancestors. I was just seeking the right path. However, not everyone could accept that answer. Some relatives even cut off ties, considering their family to have become strangers. Meanwhile, at work, Jingmi began to feel pressure. Her boss and colleagues noticed that she was now wearing a hijab and often asked permission to pray. One day, she was called by her manager. Jingmi, we have noticed your changes. We respect your faith, but can you be more flexible with the company rules? Don't be too conspicuous with your clothes and prayer times." Jingmi lowered her head, then calmly replied, "I can still work well, and my prayer does not interfere with my work. I hope the company can also respect my faith." Her manager was silent. He knew Jingmi was a competent worker, so it was not easy for him to fire her just because of her religion. However, from that day on, Jingmi began to be treated differently. The big projects that used to be entrusted to her were now given to other people. She was slowly marginalized. However, she did not give up. She continued to work professionally, maintained her morals, and was patient in the face of unfair treatment. During this difficult time, her family became a refuge for Jingmi. They strengthened each other. Her father, who used to oppose Islam, has now become her biggest supporter. He said, "I used to be afraid that you were going the wrong way, but now I understand. You have chosen the right path, and we must remain strong." Jingwei, her older sister, who also had difficulties in her job because of her Islam, began to consider starting her own business. "If they don't accept us at work, why don't we create our own opportunities?" And she said one night. Finally, with the capital they had collected, Jingwei and Jingmi opened a digital design business that served clients from various Muslim countries. Their business grew rapidly because of their professionalism and high work ethic. On the other hand, Jingmi's mother began to be active in the Muslim community. She helped female converts who were experiencing difficulties like her. Even though she was old, she remained enthusiastic about learning and teaching Islam to those who wanted to know more. Years passed, and their family grew stronger in Islam. However, a great trial came when Jingmi's mother fell ill again. This time, her condition was worse. The doctor said that she would not live much longer. In her hospital bed, her mother smiled weakly and held Jingmi's hand. "Don't be sad, son. I am grateful that Allah gave us the opportunity to know Islam together." Jingmi held back her tears. She knew that her mother had accepted her fate sincerely. That night in her long prostration, Jingmi prayed, "O Allah, you have given my mother guidance, and I am grateful. When the time has come, take her in a state of faith." A few days later, her mother breathed her last with a smile on her face. She left as a Muslima. Sadness struck their family, but they knew that her mother's faith would be the most beautiful legacy. Her mother's departure was a turning point for her father and Jingwei. They grew closer to Allah. Her father, who had only read about Islam, now began to study the Quran and pray 5 times a day with full sincerity. Jingwei, who had previously been doubtful about her Islam, finally decided to study religion more deeply. She even began to preach to her friends who were still searching for the truth. Jingmi herself became more active in the Muslim community in China. She began teaching Islamic classes for young women, helping those who were experiencing difficulties like she had once faced. One day, a young girl came to her with tears in her eyes. "I used to be afraid to convert to Islam because my family didn't support it. But after hearing your story, I feel braver." Jingmi smiled. She knew that her journey was not over. She had to keep fighting, not only for herself, but also for others. Guidance is indeed a gift, but maintaining it requires struggle. However, as long as someone holds fast to Allah, they will never be alone. And Jingmi, along with her family, have proven that the light of Islam will always shine, even though trials come one after another. After going through various trials, Jingmi and her family became more steadfast in Islam. However, they realized that maintaining their faith in an environment that was unfamiliar with Islam was not easy. They wanted to do more, not only for themselves, but also for the people around them who were still searching for the truth. Jingmi began to be more active in the Muslim community in China. She joined an organization that supported female converts who were experiencing challenges in maintaining their faith. Many women came to her, sharing stories of how they had been kicked out of their homes, lost their jobs, or even forced to leave Islam by their families. One day, a young girl named Leiling came to her with a face full of sadness. "Sister Jingmi, I want to convert to Islam, but my parents threatened to expel me. I'm afraid of losing my family, but my heart is convinced that Islam is the right path." Jingmi held Leiling's hand gently and said, "Islam does not teach us to fight our parents, but it also does not teach us to ignore the truth. Be patient, keep studying, and show your family that Islam makes you a better person. Guidance is Allah's business. Our job is to remain steadfast. Liling finally took the Shahada with a firm heart, and with Jingmi's guidance, she began to preach to her family with great affection. After years of rejecting Islam, Jingmi's father has now become a role model for many parents who are starting to open up to Islam. He continues to work at his company, but he is now a wiser and more patient person. His colleagues who used to doubt his decision to convert to Islam began to see positive changes in him. One day, an old colleague came to him and asked, "You used to be so strict about religion. Why do you seem calmer now?" Her father smiled and replied, "Because I finally found something bigger than myself, faith in the one Almighty God." Since then, several of her friends began to be interested in learning about Islam. Jingmi's father never forced them, but through his attitude and morals, he slowly inspired many people around him. Jingwei, who was now also increasingly studying Islam, began to expand his business. He and Jingmi decided to create a halal product line in China, something that was still rare in his country. However, a big challenge came when they faced strict regulations and stigma from some parties who still viewed Islam with suspicion. "Why do you bother selling halal products? The market is small here," said one of his business partners. However, Jingwei answered firmly, "We are not only looking for profit, but also want to help our Muslim brothers get products that are truly in accordance with the Sharia." With hard work and patience, their efforts finally succeeded. Not only did Muslims buy their products, but also many non-Muslims began to appreciate the concept of cleanliness and honesty in the halal business. Their business grew rapidly, and they even began to export halal products to other countries in Asia. Years passed, and Jingmi's family witnessed how Islam began to develop in China. The mosques that were once deserted are now increasingly crowded with converts who have just found guidance. Jingmi, who is now known as an inspirational figure, is often invited to speak at Muslim forums, both at home and abroad. However, even though his life is now more stable, he never forgets the difficult journey he has gone through. One night, as she sat on her balcony, she looked up at the sky and whispered, "O Allah, you have guided me from darkness to light. You have strengthened my heart and my family in Islam. Do not let us turn away from your path." She knew that the trials of life would never end, but as long as she held on to her faith, she would never be alone. Jingmi and her family are now proof that Islam is not just about belief, but also about struggle, patience, and example. And the light of Islam that they carry, God willing, will continue to shine, touching more hearts who are still searching for the truth. After years of living as steadfast Muslims, Jingmi and her family have increasingly seen how Islam has given them peace, blessings, and guidance in every step. However, they also know that the journey is long and full of challenges. Although Islam is growing in China, there are still many obstacles that the Muslim community must face, including policies that limit religious freedom. One day, Jingmi attended a Muslim community meeting in her city. One participant said, "We have to be careful. There are many new rules that can limit our activities. How can we continue to spread Islam without causing problems?" Jingmi understood the concern. However, he answered wisely, "Islam never teaches us to fight with violence. We can preach in a peaceful way, through morals, knowledge, and wisdom. If we remain steadfast and show that Islam is a religion that brings peace, then people will gradually understand." They also agreed to continue to spread Islam in a more inclusive way, such as holding social activities, educational programs, and humanitarian aid for anyone, regardless of religion. Seeing the increasing number of converts in their community, Jingmi and Jingwei took the initiative to establish an Islamic learning center. They worked with several local scholars to open basic classes on Islam, starting from learning the Quran, basic fiqh, to Islamic history. Many young people were interested in learning, including some non-Muslims who were curious about Islam. Jingmi, her father, and Jingwei had the opportunity to perform the Hajj pilgrimage. When she first saw the Kaaba, Jingmi's tears flowed. She remembered her journey, from a girl who was once full of confusion to a Muslim woman who is steadfast in her faith. In front of the Kaaba, she prayed, O Allah, thank you for guiding me to this path. Thank you for giving guidance to my family. Guard our faith and allow us to continue to be a light for others. The Hajj journey further strengthened their faith. They returned to China with renewed vigor, ready to continue spreading goodness and helping more people find guidance. Years passed and now Jingmi is married to a Muslim man who shares her vision in preaching. They build a harmonious Muslim family and educate their children with Islamic values. Jingwei also married and had children whom she taught to remain steadfast in Islam amidst a society of different beliefs. Despite their increasing age, they did not stop preaching. They continued to share knowledge, help converts, and contribute to the Muslim community. One day, a Muslim journalist from abroad came to interview Jingmi. What keeps you strong in Islam, despite the many obstacles you face? Jingmi smiled and replied, because I know that Islam is the truth. When I first found Islam, I felt like I found a part of myself that had been missing. And when you find something precious, you will never let it go, no matter how big the obstacles are. The story of Jingmi and her family is proof that guidance is an extraordinary gift. However, maintaining guidance requires struggle, patience, and strong faith. With patience, determination, and wise preaching, they not only managed to maintain their faith, but also inspired many people to learn more about Islam. Now Jingmi no longer feels afraid or doubtful. She knows that guidance is the greatest gift that Allah has given her. And as long as she still has the opportunity, she will continue to spread the light of Islam wherever she goes. Friends of the Islamic faith who are blessed by Allah, I hope this video is useful and see you in our next video.